Archon, strategy that hurts. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
Today we're playing Archon. Archon has a lot of similarities to chess, but it's not chess. Are we surprised that we haven't seen more traditional tabletop games? We had Othello pretty recently, but also not recently. If you think about these things only coming out like weekly, that makes it seem like it was further away. What are you guys' thoughts? Should we have gotten a chess game before a video game adaptation of a game similar to chess?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that I'm surprised that we haven't seen more tabletop-like games that utilize the fact that it's a video game in an interesting way. Like chess, great, yeah, put it on the NES, but like I can also just play chess. Whereas this is like, you couldn't do this. Like it's nice to see something a little different than just what you can do on the tabletop.
I also don't know how recently like computer-controlled chess was even possible. Like I know that it was definitely in the 80s that it was like a computer can actually play chess against a human and put up a fight, but I don't know, like, would that have been an NES thing? I mean, that's like at least why we wouldn't have a chess game, maybe not like a checkers game. Maybe we should have had a checkers game. But I guess they had to make up their own game to get that idea across.
I don't really know the early computer chess games and stuff like that, but I have to imagine that if video games, even the concept of them, was around in the 60s, that certainly people were also fiddling around with like chess computer engines back then, but clearly not the same kind of computer chess that you're referring to, Sean. I'm not trying to give you a gotcha.
I mean, it's also an NES. Like, it's whatever hardware they were using, it's probably better than this.
Right. I feel like, there was probably somebody way back when who made it this way. Yeah, it had no graphical interface or whatever, but you could give a computer the information and it could tell you the next move that then you would have to manually use the chessboard to put the piece where it wanted it.
But there would be no fun little like arena arcade in the middle there, so I think we're better off with what we got.
Yeah, you're right, Sean, because this isn't chess. Even if the similarities are that like pieces have a certain amount of moves that each one can make, so like in chess, pawns can't move the same way that bishops can. This game also has units that move uniquely, and it kind of has a checkered board 8x8, but this is a 9x9, and it's not fully alternating colors. It's kind of, there's sections.
It's kind of breathing.
Right. Light and dark, and they change based on the time and stuff like that. Maybe I should break this down a little easier. There's two sides. There's a light side and a dark side, and the light side, let's say, the reason why I say light side and dark side and not white pieces and black pieces is because the teams are even different. It's unique based on whether you're on the light or the dark. So you have 18 pieces on each side. The board is 9x9 squares, and you win the game by having one of your units on each of the 5 PowerPoint squares, which is not something that is possible in chess at all. These are basically squares that are specifically designated as, hey, if you have a unit in all 5 of these, you automatically win the game. Think of like some Harry Potter Quidditch bullshit,
that's some
where
Quidditch
like,
shit.
yeah, it's like, yeah, they have like, it's pretty much soccer, and then all of a sudden there's this snitch that you can also just grab and automatically win the game.
I don't know if I agree with that analogy at all, because Quidditch is a very dumb rule. Like, there's a very dumb rule that ruins the game of Quidditch. I think this is actually a very interesting, like, this is almost like, this is what makes the game interesting to me.
Oh yeah, well I'm not saying it either way. I guess what I'm saying is that in chess there's only one way to win. It's to pin the king so that he is in checkmate and can't possibly make a move that basically any other move would also kill him, so therefore the game is over. In this, there's like the win state of having 5 PowerPoint squares, or removing all opposing pieces from the board, or imprisoning the last remaining creature on the opposing side so that they can't move anywhere either.
Yeah. Yeah, because I would say that overall this is not like as one-to-one to chess as like it seems at first. Like it's clearly inspired by chess and clearly like supposed to be like a take on a chess-like game, but it is not like an advanced or like altered version of chess. Like it's very clearly its own game with like some DNA from chess.
It's almost like a lot of it is just cosmetically similar to chess, and it's actually closer to like a grid-based tactical fighter, like not XCOM, but like an Endless Legend, where on this grid, if you go into battle via the grid with another character, then you go into like a tinier battle within that grid to actually figure out what's going to be the end state. But yeah, I get that it's not going for that.
Right, because the difference here, obviously, is that in chess, the pawn it's totally possible for the pawn to even go as far as checkmating. It's not that the pawn is not as powerful as the queen, it's just that the movement is different, but certainly all pieces can beat other pieces. If the queen is diagonal to the pawn can capture it on the next move. Here, any piece has the ability to take down another piece. It's just not, you don't remove the piece by landing on it. Instead, when you land on the opposing piece, the two pieces battle it out. It brings you into an arena based on the color of the board. So there's neutral, light, and dark. So in neutral, it's an even battle. In a light square, it's heavily favoring the light side. And in a dark square, it's heavily favoring the dark side. And even aesthetically, the graphics kind of change a little bit and change the kind of sprites that you see on screen. However, in this battle, it is a one-on-one real-time combat system. There's no strategy here. This is where the action combat comes into play. And whoever wins, based on the losing HP first, whoever takes the piece, then they get that square and the other piece is removed from the board. So, this actually has like a Harry Potter element to it too, right, Joe? Where like there's that in the Sorcerer's Stone, they play the chess.
Yeah, the wizard's
pieces.
chess.
Right, yeah, and they actually fight.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool. I don't know that if in Harry Potter, though, if there's ever like a way where it's like, hey, you've made the correct move in chess to take it, but like the other... I actually never thought of that. Like that the other defending opponent could like just be stronger and still kill you. I assume it's not, but that is one thing that's cool about this too, is like the strategy all comes from trying to attack your opponent when they're on a square that gives you the advantage and not be attacked while you're on a square that gives them the advantage. But yeah, it's totally possible to be like a very weak character or a weak player being attacked, or like a weak piece or whatever being attacked by a strong piece, and like if you're just that skilled at like action-based video games, you might still win. It's just going to be a lot harder that way. So like if you're not good at that, you better rely heavily on the strategy to give you as many advantages as possible.
Mike, can you tweet J.K. Rowling to confirm whether or not that's how that game worked?
Yeah, I hear she's pretty active on social media these days.
Yeah, I know that you can get some information that way. But no, like I like that there are two different variables that go into like what should I try and like am I going to be able to win this fight? You've got different grades of hero. Like you've got the pawn equivalent, which are, they can just go stabby or bashy. And then all of like the back row characters have some kind of special skill, whether it's like the golems that just throw a really big rock, or the phoenix, which just sort of explodes itself over and over. Like there's a lot of asymmetry and variety in power. But then you also add that sort of environmental changes, like you've got the pieces, you've got the board squares that are always going to favor one or the other, and then you've got all these central areas that it's all about timing, whether it's going to favor you or not. So it leads to a lot of at least room for strategy.
Yeah, and it's heavily layered too, because like, yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just repeating what you just said, Sean, but like we're talking about the strategy of the actual board movement. But then also, like, yeah, using the different stats of the different characters, you got to think, like, yes, it makes sense, like, that the unicorn can go take out this, Gaul, or whatever, I'm trying to think of things, the dragon, but you got to think about, like, well, okay, but what's my unicorn's attack, and how fast is it, and how much health does it have?
And have I been attacked recently, and will I have less health? Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, what's the stats of the thing I'm attacking? So there's, like, even though the action part is not quite as, like, just a strategy game as, like, the board part, there's still, like, that action video game strategy you have to think about. Like, okay, what's the best strategy for this character against this character? Like, it really goes pretty deep if you think of, those action segments are very simple, like, which is nice, which I think is necessary for a game like this. They're very simple to play, but everyone has a different, stat set.
Yeah, so let's talk about the actual combat, because I feel like most people can visualize the chessboard pieces and how that part of the game works, even if you don't know. The 5 PowerPoint squares are just essentially the a cross on the screen, with the middle piece being the middle center piece being the 5th point. And if you can somehow, I think that's great, because then there's 3 sides in the middle of the board, and then 1 on each side for the light and dark. So this way you can't just race to these squares and call game over. You would have to definitely get into some kind of combat with the opposing side.
Because the default space that, like, the king or / queen equivalent, or just the most powerful unit on the board for each team, their default space is one of those power spaces.
Right. So to get away from the strategy for a second, I'd like to stay on the combat, which you both have alluded to is a little simple, but still has some problems, I think. Even if it's great on one hand that it is fast. It would suck if these then took you into very long battles that decide the outcome of something that by the time you got back to the board, you were kind of like, wait, what was my strategy? What was I going for? To have to recalibrate between the scenes. It's nice that they're fast, but I don't think there's actually enough going on in this combat, even between the different units, to make this part of the game fun. This real-time action is top-down, and most enemies, other than the pawn units, most enemies shoot like a projectile bullet that doesn't shoot often. I think some of them have like a faster reload than others, but it's hard to tell when you're like good to shoot again. And especially in squares where it's, you're heavily favored or heavily disfavored based on the light or dark square, this can be a huge problem for the other unit. And I feel like the game lost a little bit of its balance in the actual combat versus the proposed idea of this combat.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree, because I think that if it were any less simple, I think you'd be taking away from the overall game. Like I feel like this is here as like a means to just add something that you have to think about when you go to attack. Like, okay, now will I be able to take on this person? I thought that these sections, while I will say I'm not good at them when I'm playing against the computer, so like maybe that if I get a little better at them, I'll like them even more. But these sections are very easy to like pick up, and like that's all you kind of need. Like it's just the extra bit of strategy to add to it. And like you said, I'm glad that it's not any longer. But like as far as the recharging of your attack or of your projectile, I mean, I think that that's also meant to be part of it. Each character has a different recharge rate, and you have to think about that as you're attacking who you're attacking. Like, oh, this guy recharges really fast. And also, I don't know if you noticed, but the light side has like a high pitched chime that tells you when you're reloaded, and the dark side has a low pitched chime that tells when they're reloaded. So you always know if you're listening to that when each player is ready to shoot, even your enemy. So you can like use that to be like, okay, he's ready to shoot. I better kind of like try and bait that out of him, and like, okay, I'm ready to shoot now. I can attack.
Yeah, I think the one thing that bothered me in the actual combat sequences wasn't so much the simplicity of it, because I agree that was the right choice in something like this. It was more so that there's a bit of jankiness, especially when you're maneuvering around the little obstacles, which I think it's necessary just so that like all these obstacles need to be there just to add some asymmetry to the arena, so it's not just like, all right, you shoot him and he shoots you and stand on the other side of the room. Like in some they're like gravestones, and some they're rocks, and some they're like weird statues. But whenever you're maneuvering around those, like the game doesn't know what to do with collision. It seems like it sort of will pop you all around the obstacle in question and spit you out somewhere, touching it. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of describing what this feels like, but it's almost like the equivalent of, in an online game, like weird rubber banding, and you just end up in a strange spot. I don't know if you guys experienced this. Did you?
Yeah, I did. It's like a bounce. It bounces you around on those obstacles. So instead of being able, like, you're either clipping through them on accident, or they're like pushing you back so hard that it screws up your movement.
And it's not even like, it doesn't even show. It doesn't feel like it's supposed to be done on purpose. It feels like it's not doing a calculation correctly.
Yeah, it's weird because it's like these things are supposed to be solid objects, but they made it so it's like, yeah, you can use them as cover and stuff, which I think is what they're for and like what I like about them. But it's like, yeah, you weirdly blink through them, like, but like you said, not necessarily in the direction you're going. Sometimes it'll pop you somewhere else. So it's like they're helpful, but they're also kind of harmful, and it does not feel like it's necessarily like a designed challenge.
Yeah.
And I think my problem with the action sequences is that they make me doubt the premise of the game, where, like, you know, you might be down, but you're not out, because any unit can take on any other unit. Sometimes in these action sequences, it really feels untrue, that idea that if you have a, what are they, like knights or whatever? Yeah, the pawn pieces, the knight. If you have a knight and it's going up against the dragon, you know, or even like a basilisk or something, especially if it's in a neutral or dark colored square, this is going to basically be an unwinnable fight. The computer would really have to screw up badly for an extended period of time, given the health bar bonuses that they get for being in those particular squares and just how much more powerful they are. Again, like, I get that it's probably supposed to go down that way. It's just that if the hook was that anything can happen on this board, and that just your positioning alone doesn't mean that you're in a better spot, I'm on two fences about it, because there's the obvious thing that, like, this is great for the light and dark pieces of the board, because that actually means that it matters where you place your units, right? That you would want to always kind of occupy, if you're playing on the light side, light squares. So this way, anybody who dare challenge you has to play on your field. And that's great for strategy. But then there's other times where, you know, you are low on health to begin with, and now one of these uber powerful pieces just kind of comes in and walks the floor with you. It doesn't feel as strategic at that point. It almost feels like the stronger characters can just kind of brute force their way past the other enemies.
Well, I don't want to be the guy who just keeps disagreeing with everything, but I disagree. Because I think that what's so cool about that is that it's like it is what it meant to be. It's like, yeah, this is like, this thing will probably kill you, but it's possible. Like, if you get yourself into a position where you're like, shit, like, all I have left is like this pawn and they've got their dragon left. It's like, yeah, you're gonna have to pull out this come from behind, almost impossible victory, which is very unlikely, but it can happen. And it's like, it simulates that, like, that underdog story. You know, it's like, that's the whole idea. Like, even if you're like pinned down by like the enemy in like how you would be on a chessboard, like, you still have that last, like, hey, maybe if I can come in clutch enough, I can like just barely scrape by with like this crazy skill of this like one knight going against the fire-breathing dragon. Like that part of it seems really cool to me, where it's like this mix of strategy versus your own actual skill.
Like, yeah, twitch reflex stuff.
Yeah, like that part was what drew me to the game, like, the most, I think.
And I would say like some of the like this is sort of exacerbated by some of like the frame perfectness that the computer has, like with the unicorn to be specific. Like any unit that has a projectile weapon has a different speed associated with that projectile, and most of them are kind of like shmup level speed where you can maneuver around them depending on how fast your unit is. However, like the unicorn basically shoots a bullet and it travels like many inches across the screen per frame, I feel like, and it's just almost impossible to dodge if you're playing against the computer. However, I think if you were playing against another human who may not have like perfect input, it would be a lot more even and more of like a fighting chance for you as the weaker character. So I think a lot of this is just exacerbated by a perfect computer.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, so I did play against the computer and a human, and while I lost against the human as well, and I did eventually win against the computer, I do think it is easier against a human because it's like you're both kind of like, oh, like this is hard to, you're both like, it's just hard to react to. But for like, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk more about like the idea of balance later, but like as far as the unicorn, the dark side does also have a sort of almost equivalent to the unicorn, where he has a weapon that is just as fast and it's actually a little stronger, but the difference is he has a shorter HP bar. That's the basilisk. So it's like, yeah, those feel a little like OP, but also it's like you have one too. But I guess I get what you're saying. If you're playing against a computer, it still might feel unfair because the computer is the computer. Like, you can just do it.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess like a lot of what I'm going to say might just come down to, a question of skill and such. But if you think about chess, right, both sides have exactly the same pieces. They don't behave any differently at all. And that's the kind of game where if you capture enough pieces early on, then it is, for the right skill level, it is a one game, right? Once you're like +8, there's no real chance that the other opponent's going to get past you because you were already smart enough to take 8 points away from them in a chess game. Here, yeah, you're both being given the same types of units. Maybe they're creatively named and look differently. But I don't think like that's not really what the balance is, right? The balance isn't that they gave everybody the same kind of unit and you'll have the same tools. I'm talking about just even the balance between how the units behave in the fights themselves and what that ultimately means for pace of play and the idea that like it's anybody's game and stuff like that. It's great that we both have a unicorn equivalent and such, but it doesn't help the fact that most unicorns are going to kill almost all pawn units, at the end of the day, like that they don't really stand a chance.
Yeah, but
I would like to, did you tell me that you beat one of the stronger units with your pawn?
I did as well, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really cool. Like, it didn't happen often. I think it happened like once, maybe twice, but it was really cool when it did. And I was like, oh, I might actually be able to turn this game around now. But like, that's the other thing is like, of course, like, when my pawn goes up against like their the sorceress, I'm like, well, I'm screwed. But like that's also on me, is like not putting my pawn in that position. In chess, if your pawn goes up against something that's in a position to kill it, it's just gonna kill it, whereas this, it's like, all right, maybe I could survive. Like,
yeah. No,
I'm not saying
like
this is better than chess. I'm just saying it's a different idea.
That's the headline.
Yeah.
Archon better than chess, says Joe.
No, I'm not saying that chess is better than this either, vice versa. I think the hill that I'm willing to die on is that the reason why we don't get like a chess 2 is that it's very hard to find true balance in these kinds of games, and there are ultimately like exploits against them that keep the 1,000-year-old chess game still relevant today. That is the idea of that is the strategy that are built around those particular pieces and how they seem to work well, and that there used to be pieces back in the day that behaved a little differently, and they said, hey, we should get rid of that and fix it. And I'm sure there's still room for improvement even in chess, right? Of like, maybe it turns out white is just too powerful, his ability to go first and everything. these things don't actually matter for the actual game. I just think the idea of the units themselves, like, it's not as cool as a tactics game because of the way that it sets out as a chessboard. Whereas, like, in a tactics game, it's not it's not just checkerboard pieces. It's actually like a map, and you push units together, and you think about, like, there's a little bit of like wartime combat involved in that, and this is more one-to-one with chess, and therefore has the same flaws as a chess game.
I would say that it's not quite as one-to-one with chess, just because like it sort of is simulating that asymmetric environment with the changing like pitch of each square. I think that adds like the kind of complexity that like makes it less of a chess game and more of a tactics game.
Yeah, and I think that the only other thing that like is still that I'm still kind of hanging on is that like when what we're talking about with like the pawn, or we keep calling it a pawn, whatever, the knight versus the basilisk, like that being unbalanced, that's an unbalance like in that particular battle, but that doesn't make the game unbalanced. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like if you go up against, in any video game, if you go up against an enemy that's stronger than you, you wouldn't say this whole game's unbalanced. Like, oh, maybe you got to go level up, or maybe you got to go to, this is like, you got into that position. You're somehow, your opponent did something, or you did something that got you into that position where you're going to get attacked by it. Could have gone the other way, but like the whole game as a whole, we have to look at it as like the entire thing as like, is it balanced? And I think I'm not saying they necessarily did it perfectly, but I think they did a good job of making the dark side enemies and the light side enemies balanced. So like, what if that happens to you? You could also do that to them, like, and you have to think about like, how can I get myself in a position where I'm not having these unbalanced battles, or I am having unbalanced battles that are unbalanced in my favor. So it's like, I just think that the way those two things marry together is like your strategy informs how you will play the action side of it. Is the point, And
I think we haven't entirely we haven't painted the whole picture, because it isn't entirely balanced in terms of like, oh, the knight is the equivalent of the goblin and yada yada, because each side also has one unique character, the Phoenix, which again that's the light side, and that just blows itself up, and you just sort of like try and blow up next to the guy. And then the dark side has the like metamorpho dude, the shapeshifter, yeah. And that just makes it perfectly balanced and is kind of lame, but those do add to add some extra levels to it as well, I think.
Yeah, and when I first kind of saw that like, first of all, not only are there different enemies, but like some of the enemies that are like the mirror equivalent, they have slight different stats. Like they'll have a boost in one thing and a lack in the other, and it'll be like slightly different. And I'm on the fence of whether or not like I prefer that, or I prefer it like to be, no, there's an equal on each side. So that way, like, no matter which side you play, there's not one side that could possibly have an advantage, like, once you played it enough. I do like that they're different. I like that you could try it differently. I mean, I would also kind of really like if they were totally, not all equal, but like the sorceress was exactly equal to the wizard. And then the knight was exactly equal to the goblin.
The joblin,
like, so that way it's even, but that didn't bother me too much. But yeah, the shapeshifter thing seemed cool, but I just didn't feel like there was enough of a unique thing on the other side to be cool. Like the I don't know, what was it?
Phoenix?
The Phoenix is pretty similar to the Banshee on the dark side.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas like there's nothing like a shapeshifter on the light side. I think there's like something that's unique on the light side, which is like the
genie?
Maybe, yeah, but like it just didn't seem as unique. It's like it felt like they were trying to like throw a little wrench into it and make it like, oh, here's like the sleeper for each side, but it just felt like one was like way more unique than the other.
I thought the genie I think has maybe like the fastest shot speed and a really large health bar. So I think that's like he's very powerful too, comparatively.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, the shapeshifter is like, well, okay, you're going to take the shape of exactly whatever attacks you, which seems like So you're not even getting an advantage. You're getting like equal. Whereas like that felt a little weird.
Which creates a weird problem with the shapeshifter versus like, say, the Phoenix.
Yeah, that was specifically pointed out on the Wikipedia page, so I just had to try it out, and it was really funny. It actually took several minutes.
And even the Phoenix as a unique piece, I hated it if I was playing on the light side. The explosion thing is very awkward and kind of traps you in a you're stuck while that animation's going on. And so most likely, if the computer or human is smart enough, they'll just wait until your explosion animation is done if you didn't manage to hit them, and then they get a free hit when you spawn back in.
Yeah, my strategy with the Phoenix was just try and take out the Banshee with it as soon as possible, because the Banshee had like a similar thing, but I think it's more powerful, but it doesn't shield itself with its explosion, whereas you do.
Oh, yeah.
So I
yeah.
would just be like, okay, well, at least I can get some use out of this Phoenix before something else kills it, because anything with a projectile usually would kill me when I had the Phoenix.
So pieces move differently in this game than in chess 2, where it's, you get 3 spaces for most things. Some get 4, some get 5, but it's also ground or flying or teleporting, as opposed to just, I guess like the knight in chess comes the closest to the flying creatures in the sense that they can hop over other units, but they give you two different options there. It's the type of movement you're doing and the amount of spaces you can go. And so if you have 3 spaces as the troll, you don't have to go forward. You don't have to go behave like a rook where you can only move in rows. It's like you can go anywhere you want, 3 spaces. And so that also creates some unique situations on the board where you could think about like where you want to position your units for the PowerPoint squares. If you want to lump a bunch of guys together so that you can keep fighting to take back a PowerPoint square against one unit at a time, that both options are viable, but you have the ability, rather than thinking like, all right, well, my troll only moves in L-shaped directions, so I have to think about how I'm going to get him to this particular pace. That doesn't happen in this game.
No, and I think that's another point that makes it like closer to a turn-based tactics game where it's literally just a movement count. I think if they added like the only kind of movement was specific to each piece, then the chess analogies would be even more inevitable, and like you can't really say that it's not trying to be chess anymore. So I think that was also a good decision.
The sorceress and the wizard also have the ability, besides being some of the strongest pieces, they have the ability to cast spells. They can heal, shift time, revive, which is a really cool idea, similar to, again, in chess, where you get to the other end of the board and you can change your piece. This time it's like you can't change your piece, but instead you can bring back a piece from the dead. The other thing about these spells is that you can only use them once per game. Not one spell for the entire game, but once you revive a unit, that is the end of your revive. So you might want to think about that before wasting it early on or something. I think the ability to lock these as a one-time use, it makes it like it actually complements the idea of the whole strategy thing, but also just of the spells in general, so that wizards and sorceresses don't have this sense of unlimited power where they should be removed from the game almost, don't bother putting them into play because you can just use them as your spellcasters from afar. Instead, you're kind of encouraged to get them into the battle as well, and because they're powerful and they can take down enemies that are posing a threat.
Well, also it's like gives you this strategy of like, do I want to use my my summon spell right now, or do I want to wait until I really need it later? Because the longer you wait, the more likely you are, like, the enemy is to take out your wizard because as strong as the wizard is, he has a very small HP bar. So it's like it really adds to like the decision making, I think.
I couldn't find anything about the NES version specifically, but the developers mentioned in their interview with Compute Gazette that in the computer games, at least, the computer adapts over time in an individual game to help the player defeat the computer, so that the longer the game goes on, the computer actually behaves worse to allow the computer to allow the player to win, rather than the computer getting tougher and honing in on its victory. I don't know if you guys experienced that at all. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting note from them. I guess like in some ways, if there was a difficulty mode for that, like a selection of, beginner or advanced, and the beginner mode did that would be a good way to learn, right? How to like face up against the computer. But even then, you're not really learning because it's just getting easier. But I think there should have been an option.
I did win against the computer, but now I'm thinking back on like the moment where I was like, oh my God, I really turned this around, and thinking like, oh, maybe the computer just started getting stupider as time went on.
I really don't know how, like, what capability, like what is the AI actually doing when it does that? Because usually when I think of difficulty in a game of this generation, it's like a numerical thing. Like it's either more or less health, more.
I'm guessing
or
it misses
less powerful.
fire on purpose.
Yeah, but like how does it do that? I don't know if the NES was capable of something like that.
It could also give like less than optimal decisions, like in where to go.
I suppose like on the board makes more sense.
Yeah, I do remember thinking that like one time I was playing and I was having a real hard time getting all the PowerPoint squares, and then like at one point I was like, well, why didn't they just go there? They could have stopped me, and they didn't, and then I won. So like maybe that had something to do with it too.
The NES port also has a new gameplay rule that encourages combat. So if no battle has been fought for, I think it's 12 rounds, the game automatically ends in a stalemate. That was not present in any of the other versions. Probably not something that's going to happen if you're just like picking this game up and playing it either. Like there's no reason to avoid combat. But I could see situations in like really high level play where they want you to encourage to continue fighting rather than being reserved about your units.
Yeah, I think especially if you're playing against another person and you both really know how to play, and then there's like somebody's trying to, if there's some strategy or something, that gives people incentive.
Chess has a rule like that too, where you can't make the same move 3 times in a row, and that would also cause a stalemate.
Did we mention the Lumina squares at all?
Those are the PowerPoints, right?
Yeah, we briefly... No, this is the ones that changed over time, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we briefly mentioned it, but I think we should go into more detail about it, because that's the board strategy, right? Like, that's what makes this board stand out, as opposed to, again, if it was a checkerboard, you would just always stay in the light squares and not have to worry about, the dark side being overpowered against you. Here, because there's kind of a zone, particularly in the middle, but it is kind of spread out. I don't know how to describe it. It looks
it's like it is the cross. It's right. Sort of bringing all of those power squares together. But that's sort of what I was talking about when I was talking about the like sort of an analogy for the terrain and environment, if this were being compared more to like a tactics game on ground, whereas like instead of it's dark or light, like this has like acid on it, and like this sort of like zone of control, area denial that you see in more complex tactics games. But it's more like shifting, it's like pulsing instead of the player or the enemy having actual control over how that shifts.
Yeah, and it really informs a lot of the decision making as well, because because of where this cross of squares that are constantly changing, it's like a day-night cycle, so they get lighter and lighter, and then they get darker and darker. So like the darker it is, the more of an advantage the dark side gets, and the lighter it is, the more of the advantage the light side gets. But But what I thought was cool is that it goes through, like you said, all of those PowerPoint squares. So that makes you think like, oh, I can capture this PowerPoint square pretty early. But throughout the game, that PowerPoint square will become a major disadvantage to you, and that opens up the enemy to attack you on a square. So like you don't want to be on those squares for too long, but you need to be on 5 of them at once in order to win the game. So it's like, it's tough. It's tough to win that way, to be honest. Like, I feel like in all the games that I've played, only like 1 or 2 matches ended that way. Most of the matches ended like with both sides trying to get there and one side just running out of pieces from dying in battle over and over again.
Yeah, I think the PowerPoint squares are necessary to encourage combat situations in all over the board, right? So this way you have to go over to the other side. You have to try to keep control of the middle of the board. You're not just trying to get to the other side, right? So I think that encourages what is going to be the likely outcome of just the opposing team lost all their units, and that's how you're probably going to get into a win state instead of the PowerPoint squares, or you're going to, because of these fights, eventually have one have way too many units compared to the other, and then take the PowerPoint squares that way. There's not like at least I can't think of a unique situation where early on in the game somebody could just grab all 5 squares by tricking the other player, by making them like come out and go to unexpected places and then take those squares without being like, a heavy war zone. I couldn't see that happening.
Yeah. When I the first match that I played, neither me nor my opponent knew how to play. We hadn't read the manual or anything. So we were just playing, and we were just attacking each other. And I was kind of like, oh, this is dumb. There's no actual strategy. There's no reason for this to be on a board. Like you just keep moving until you can attack the person you want to attack. And we just did that until someone was totally out of pieces. Then after reading the manual, I was like, oh, this is an entirely different game just because of the Lumina squares and the PowerPoints. Like just adding those 2 elements made this like, oh, there is a lot of strategy now. It does matter where you position yourself.
And the wizard and sorceress can, via the shift time spell, reverse the order that the tiles were changing colors in. And so if you do that, if you time that well, you could really screw over the other player by extending the amount of time that you have on the light squares in an area that they were expecting to be dark. Again, probably a high-level play move, probably not something I personally did, but it's fun to see the impact that these spells could have on strategy. Then again, maybe just thinking about these situations proves that they don't really happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that because something like Revive is so directly beneficial, that's sort of like, I mean, and I know that like you can only use 1 each, but whenever I was thinking of like, oh, I need to cast a spell right now, it was something like that direct, like, oh, I just need to revive. And not like, it's actually going into the middle phase now from my direction, so I need to make it come back to my direction. I was never thinking that 4D about it, but it's cool that it's there.
Yeah, I think the most, like, quote-unquote 4D I ever got with the way I was thinking was with the exchange spell, which lets you just swap out literally any 2 players on the board, like switch them with each other. So sometimes I would be like, okay, I know that the day-night cycle is going, if I'm like the dark side, I know the day-night cycle is going to be switching towards dark in like 2 turns. So on this turn, I'm going to switch one of my basilisk with whatever's standing right next to their, someone that I want to attack on that's going to be on a light square in a turn later. So it's like thinking like that much ahead. But I think that if you played this enough and got good at it, if we treated this like chess and like how people like love to play chess and get better and find new strategies, I think that shift time would be utilized a lot in the way that you're talking about. I just think it's just a game that no one's ever heard of. So so that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, apparently, actually, it's a very popular game in the early computer scene and is still like rated very favorably by most of the people. Yeah, most people played this game, so it we'll get into it in the sequel and spin-off section. But it even got a sequel, so this is one of Electronic Arts' like first 5 games ever. It's not obviously this late in 1989, but by then they were a big company. but this game first came out, I think, in either 83 or 84. And so EA now, EA bad. But back then, they were getting started. It's like, obviously, they had to get some big games on their initial lineup, and Archon was considered a very big game.
They were the champions of the people.
Well, since we were talking about it, on the sequels and spin-off side, Archon 2 Adept is the subtitle of that game. This game kind of had a subtitle too, just not on the NES version. It's not on the box, but the
light versus the dark or something.
Yeah,
right?
the light and the dark or something like that on the on all the computer versions. I guess they just thought like, no, Archon's clear enough for what the game is. We don't need the subtitle on the NES. Who knows why they didn't include it, but it's worth mentioning. Also, Adept here is the subtitle on the sequel, and Adept introduces resource management in the form of magic. Magic is gained by having pieces on power points, and then you can spend those magic points on moves or by casting spells. Summoning a spell or an elemental or a demon, or you put those pieces on the board, and then it basically incurs a per turn upkeep cost. So therefore, the whole resource management thing.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to think about okay, so I have my fire elemental on the board, but I'm going to run out of it in 2 turns, and then it's going to be done with.
Do we get this on the NES?
I don't think we get this on the NES. I think this is computer only. It was released long before 1989. So, yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing it because they probably would have just taken this one, right?
I would think so.
Yeah, so if you do want to play it, the Amiga, as always, everything is on the Amiga. If there's one thing I've learned, that there's like 3,000 video games on the Amiga. The Commodore 64, Apple II, ZX Spectrum, these are just things that I feel like are much more European. We didn't really have exposure.
Yeah, you should have said ZX Spectrum.
Right. The Amstrad CPC, it's like nobody owned that in America, right?
I thought the Amstrad CPC was like a military device.
Right? Yeah. The Atari 800, it's like nobody had that. Get out of here. Now that I know was in America, but nobody had that.
You silly goose.
And also an updated version of this very game has been announced for Joe to immediately purchase, exclusively for release on the Intellivision Amico, which means you will never see it, Joe.
Yeah,
it'll never happen.
I think it on the Switch or something. I was like, I'll download that right now. Pre-order right now.
I didn't know that they could get those kinds of exclusives for Intellivision Amico, but also they seem to do a really good job of never releasing this damn thing and just taking Kickstarter money. So I don't think we're going to see this. Archon was ported through Infinity to all even more recent mobile phones and stuff like that. Like it is something that gets ported every now and again. So there probably are more modern hardware to play it on than the NES. Maybe the computer versions, the computer's more advanced or whatever. These are things I didn't look into for this part of the sequels and spin-off section because I was more interested in that whole Adept system that they introduced in the second one.
Cute.
So I don't have any cute words or anything to tee up the essential games list. When no meets its match, no checkmate system or anything like that. So instead, I think we're just gonna go into it with the essential games list. Sean, your vote.
So I really think that this is a very unique game. As much as we kept calling out chess or tactics games in general, I think that this I've never seen anything really like this before. Like the closest analog that I could find to a game that matches this in spirit is like Blood Bowl, which is trying to be like a Warhammer version of American football, which I always enjoyed. And this sort of like remix stuff, I'm always into it, and I've had nitpicks here and there. The actual like real time battles are a little simple and can be janky at times, but I think that there's enough going on in this like cocktail of weird game features that I would say I'm gonna vote to put this on the essential games list.
And that's one vote. It needs one more. Joe, your vote.
So, I mean, no secret that I definitely really enjoyed this game. I feel like there's just so many elements that all work together in ways that create just countless types of strategy. I mean, it just gets very layered, way more layered than I thought it was going to be when I first picked it up. I mean, I thought it was just going to be chess, like with slightly different rules. Not saying that wouldn't be layered, but it would just be chess, but this did its own thing. It made something totally different, and I love the way that the strategy interacts with the actual video game, like action gameplay element of it. And yes, the collision jankiness aside, like that is a flaw. I think that personally, and I know that not everybody agreed here, but like personally, I thought that the action stuff controlled pretty well for what it needed to be. If it was a whole game based on that, I would want a lot more, polish on those parts. But just the way they work together, the amount that I was thinking about this game after playing it, and like thinking like, well, what could I do with different strategies? And just the idea, I'm not even that good at this game, but the idea that I could play it a lot and I could really come up with like new ways to play and strategy and play against other people and see how that works. I am also going to put this on, vote for this to be on the essential games list. So one of the more unique experiences. I'm going to pass it on to Mike before I say the word strategy one more time.
And 2 votes means that it is on the essential games list. So after a very long drought of, let's see, this is episode 238. In fact, Xanadu was 207. So, I mean, that's like
31.
Yeah, 31 episodes to get the next one. But we got there. I will just add, even though my vote doesn't mean anything, that I am way less enthused about this game than you guys. I didn't think that the battle system was all that impressive or even like fun. So for me, like that alone took me out of the game, because otherwise it is just kind of like thinking about pieces on the board, and I can have a better time with chess. I would just like to add that I wasn't comparing this game to chess in the traditional sense of like 2 games. I was making it a grounding point of like, well, we can talk about chess and then we can talk about this for people who aren't playing these games along with us at the same time. I definitely think there's a much more unique game than chess. In fact, even just the ability to cast spells and the PowerPoint squares and the light and dark shifting, that is all like incredibly interesting things. I just don't think the actual moment-to-moment gameplay was anything all that special. I found it kind of tedious to even just continue to go through those top-down battles, those real-time action battles. So I can't put it on the Essential Games list, but it is there. There's nothing I can do about it. So it is on the Essential Games list, and we'll see if we can get another one on next week with the Battle of Olympus, a game that I think this is the one that sometimes is compared to Zelda 2.
Oh boy!
So that has some,
I'll vote it right now. Go right on.
That just open up some more wounds while we're talking about the Essential Games list. So who knows? Either Battle of Olympus will get on the Essential Games list and will upset Zelda 2 people, or Battle of Olympus won't get on the Essential Games list and will upset Zelda 2 people.
I can't wait.
All that to say, we also have our Nostalgia Bites episode, the Portopia Serial Murder Case. Nostalgia Bites are Japanese Famicom games. Usually you don't need any Japanese knowledge to play these games. Technically, you still don't, because this is a translation patch, but it is a patch. It is a cheat. We're just trying it out once just to see if people like it.
We make the rules here.
Right. But, I figured we'd let everybody know that it's not going to be a regular thing. You're not going to have to, get on the internet and download translation patches all the time. We have 7 or now 8 other episodes that are completely like just Famicom games that you could buy on eBay right now, plop them into your Famicom, and never need to know a lick of Japanese. So you have those. But if you want to listen to this episode and you're like, wait a minute, I never heard of Nostalgia Bites, That's because it's for our Patreon page, patreon.com/nostalgia. For just $5 a month, you get access to a whole nother podcast that is a monthly basis. So right now we're in month 9. Where you at, everybody? You know, we're waiting for you. We got people on our Discord chatting it up with us. And all of the proceeds from the Patreon go into cool stuff like the Nostalgia website, nostalgicast.com. We can't host that if people don't give us money. We refuse to. So give us money and let us host the website. It's a win-win situation.